Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon. To adjust the sound on your headsets, use the volume rocker on the side near the power button. If you are curious about the full U.S. Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk. Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon. Welcome to the U.S. Center. If you are hearing this, congratulations, your headset is working properly. To adjust the sound on your headsets, use the volume rocker on the side near the power button.
Hello and welcome to the U.S. Center and our event, Resilience at Scale, a new paradigm for U.S. government infrastructure investments. It's our honor to introduce to the stage Assistant to the President and National Climate Advisor, Ali Zaidi.
Thank you so much. Grateful to be with all of you, and in particular grateful for our civil society leaders who are joining us this afternoon. We have so much work to do at this COP to help us aim at the 1.5 degree future that science demands, and that is so critical. And yet, at the same time, we've got to grapple with the reality already unleashed in our communities in the United States and all around the world as the impacts of a world that has not yet reached that tipping point still inundate us and our capacities to respond. In the United States, we've felt the impacts of climate change over the last year as historic hurricanes came and hit our communities like a wrecking ball in the southeast, turbocharged by warmer waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Those waters, their fuel for more fury and more destruction. We saw it impact in terms of extreme heat, sending thousands of Americans to the emergency room and breaking new records on mortalities associated with the impacts of extreme heat. We've seen a drought in and out of our western states that have impacted our agricultural capacity, as well as laid the groundwork for historic wildfire seasons that not only destroy through their flames, but also impact us in our lungs. Kids hundreds of miles from the fires still breathing in the smoke and being impacted by its devastation. The fingerprints of climate change are all over these impacts in the U.S. and what is felt abroad, whether it's the drought and famine that we've seen on the African continent, the countries of South and Southeast Asia submerged with record floods, the impacts that we see on a seasonal or cyclical basis, creating new uncertainties for folks who depend on agriculture for their livelihoods, and of course all of us who are embedded in that ecosystem as part of our food security. So for that reason, as President Biden has been focused on tackling the emissions that are necessary to maintain a possibility to reach a 1.5-degree future, limit the warming to that level. At the same time, he has elevated our focus as a country on the resilience and adaptation work that is necessary, and it has taken a few different shapes. The first is the contours of our resilience strategy reach to every part of our economy. We have brought together the healthcare sector to boost its resilience. Over 300 healthcare firms building up their capacity and capability. We're strengthening our grid so that the power stays on the next time a storm sweeps through. We're raising our roads so they don't wash out the next time there is a storm. We're restoring our wetlands so they can absorb more of the water that rains or storms on them. We're replanting our urban forests so that they provide the canopy and cover to reduce the impacts of extreme heat. We are making once-in-a-generation investments to water infrastructure less durable, less capable of producing clean water as a result of the stress and strain of climate change. And when we go back and we stand with our communities in the face of storms and events, we help them build back better as part of our FEMA programs, both building resilience on the front end and then helping build back better on the back end. Those are critical investments that we're making all across the United States. And in the process, we've learned a few things about the endeavor of resilience and adaptation. The first is we've got to bring innovation to this game, which is why we've issued a set of resilience game changers, key technologies that we think could unlock de-risking our climate future even as we chase down 1.5 degrees. Areas like aquifer recharge, where we could actually put more water into the system and make us more impervious to the drought risks that we are seeing. We've got to invest in innovation as part of this conversation. The second thing we've seen is the need to bring the private sector into the game, more finance flow, and that's work we're not just doing in the United States, but frankly all around the world. Yesterday I announced that we have hit the $3 billion goal of the Prepare initiative 1 year early under President Biden's leadership. We've also seen that there is so much value to bringing better data and analytics to this space. Sam Medlock, who I used to work with in a past life, we've been We've been treading down this road for a long time. I think finally we are unlocking the sort of data that we need to make better decisions about where we build infrastructure, how we build it, how we protect our people, how we do a better job as stewards of public resources. That data infrastructure needs to go global in a very, very big way, and you see it in places like Mali, where the U.S. through Servier is helping farmers do a better job of planning for the future using data that lives in the sky. And in all of this, we've learned that there are actually a bunch of platforms that unfortunately don't yet exist, including how we better develop the insurance market regime to meet this moment. We know there are codes and standards. We know there are better building materials. We know that there are better infrastructure development practices. We know that there is more capital that needs to flow. But in all of this system, there's got to be a better way to allocate the risk and to frankly, to monetize the value of reducing it if we're going to achieve the scale that we need. And that is why this panel is so essential, because not only is it about bringing the finance to the table, but about fundamentally rewiring the system so it puts a value on reducing the risk from climate change. If we fail at that task, I don't think we're going to get to the scale and speed that we need to in this moment. So I'm grateful for the U.S. Center convening this dialogue, and over to the panel. Thank you so much.
I want to say thank you for those beautiful remarks, and that is going to be really, really hard to follow. My name is Melissa Logan. I am the mayor of the city of Blytheville, Arkansas. So I am here representing Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. We are a cohort of about 105 mayors along the mighty Mississippi River. And so the theme of this talk is U.S. resilience at scale. And what does that mean? It means that a small city like Blytheville, Arkansas gets to come to an international forum like COP29 and talk about how important water is, right? So water is what our goal is at the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River is the fourth largest river in the world. And we have the responsibility of feeding 1 in 12 persons throughout the world. We export about $1 trillion worth of product along the Mississippi River on an annual basis. Since 2005, the Mississippi River has suffered about $256 billion in losses because of climate impact. And so why does that mean a lot to me? Because my area of the Mississippi River is the exporter of cotton, of corn, of soybeans, of steel. That's where we come into play here. And so what is MRCTI and what do? We are here to protect and to do what we have been charged to do as mayors. We are concerned about the people that we have been called to serve. And so that looks like for us human security. That paradigm for us is just simply human security. It is safety from chronic threats of our water source, because 20 million people along the Mississippi use that river to have water. That means water to drink, water to bathe, water to cook. That means water to transport things. And so it is our job as U.S. mayors to protect that really, really critical water source. We understand that the climate in Ukraine changed recently. And so as a result of what's happening in Ukraine's climate, the Mississippi River had to pick up the impact of wheat, the impact of flour, and we had to be prepared to do it. So resilience at scale can change at any moment, depending on the natural climate, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's flooding, or whether it's a drought. And so how do we mitigate that climate risk? Well, along the Mississippi River, MRCTI has partnered with Ducks Unlimited. And it is our partnership collaboratively to deploy 100,000 acres of wetlands. And so I said in the conversation last night, it is our time in this paradigm shift to scale to redeem the river. We have to give the river back the purpose that it was there for, to give life, because we understand that water is life. And that looks like what kind of natural resource do we deploy? Whether it be wetlands, whether it be forest. We have to gain control of our part in making this water supply flow, because that's what water flows, right? It flows in every capacity that is given. Water is the most pliable resource that we have. It's soft enough to touch, but it's big enough, that we have to let it do what it does, because that's what water is. Water is going to do what it does. And so as I stand here, I think about what should we do as mayors. Our job as mayors is to honor the water. The Mississippi River is our most critical resource, and it's so valuable to what happens internationally. We were in a talk with Brazil recently to talk about what happens on the Amazon River. And would you believe that what happens on the Amazon and what happens in those rainforests affects what happens in the U.S. climate? Well, it does. And so the water is responsible for people. It's responsible for places. It's responsible for commodities. But ultimately, it is responsible for life. And so I charge you today to consider what it means to be a river city. For MRCTI, it means 105 mayors across 10 states fighting for the life that the river gives. And so I want to leave you with this. The Mississippi River starts in Bemidji, Minnesota. And so we were there for our annual meeting last year, and we were able to meet with the indigenous people. And their word for water is Nibby. But their chief said to us, Mississippi mayors, I want you to remember that water is life. And so if you heard nothing that I've said today, I would like for you to remember that there is no life cycle without a water cycle, because water is life. Thank you.
So thank you, Mayor Logan. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here today in person and virtually here at COP29. Clearly it's well underway, and lots of people in the audience today, so really want to appreciate that. We're honored to have National Climate Advisors 80 open our event today. Over the past 4 years, the Biden-Harris administration has led and delivered on the most ambitious climate agenda in U.S. history through a whole-of-government approach. We also want to take a minute to highlight and acknowledge the leadership and the hard work that the National Climate Advisors 80 and the rest of the climate leadership team have really done. Thank you. And also thank you to Mayor Logan for her compelling remarks that have really helped set the stage for this panel discussion. Not only is climate change affecting local economies and the people in Blytheville, but the effects are interconnected and stretch far beyond town borders, going from the small towns in the Midwestern United States to international. And I think the Mississippi River watershed is really a fantastic example of that. My name is John Richert. I'm the Deputy Vice President of Infrastructure, Environment, and Private Sector at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and also responsible for implementing MCC's climate change strategy. For those of you that are unfamiliar with MCC, we're an independent U.S. government foreign assistance agency that's helping to lead the fight against global poverty. MCC has a unique development model. We provide large-scale grants, and I'm going to underscore grants, not loans, to support investments in low and low-middle income countries to help unlock their constraints to economic growth. MCC grants to our partner countries range from about $300 million to as much as almost $700 million in a given country, and they're targeted to tackle specific constraints to economic growth across a range of sectors like energy, water, transportation, health, agriculture, education, and a lot of what we do is in infrastructure. So since our establishment in 2004, MCC has partnered with 49 countries around the world, and we have invested more than $16 billion in programs that spur economic growth, that reduce poverty, and benefit more than 400 million people. Now, MCC is celebrating 20 years of impact this year, and we continue to adapt, continue to evolve, and make sure that we're responsive to global development challenges like climate change. I want to make sure that we continue to deliver results for our partner countries and for their people consistent with their development goals. This has included a number of actions in terms of how we take climate change into account in our investments, particularly for climate resilience. In fact, MCC recently made a commitment to taking a systems approach to climate resilient infrastructure alongside USAID, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, the United States Development Finance Corporation. This means looking at how infrastructure needs to work together as a system, not just asset by asset. MCC is also announcing several new and significant investments this year to help advance our partner countries' climate priorities. This includes almost $1.4 billion in new investments that will support climate-resilient and low-carbon economic development in Belize, Sierra Leone, Zambia, and Cote d'Ivoire. Almost half of that amount, $700 million, is supporting climate-related investments. So MCC is very pleased to co-host this event alongside our interagency partners, USAID, we have FEMA, we have HUD. This is really an opportunity to look at how the United States government is supporting climate resilient infrastructure investments from both a domestic and an international perspective. As you heard from National Climate Advisor Zaidi, the U.S. government has made unprecedented investments in transportation, energy, and other essential infrastructure through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to ensure that communities in the U.S. have the information and the tools they need to integrate considerations of climate resilience in their decision-making. In addition, the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE, is the largest U.S. commitment ever made to reduce climate impacts on those the most vulnerable to climate change globally. You'll hear more in our panel discussion in a moment about how our agencies are mobilizing resources and how we're making new commitments to help local communities and partner countries be more resilient to climate change. We know we can't do it alone. The investment required for resilient infrastructure is massive. We hear billions to trillions. We're really talking about trillions of dollars per year to really move the needle on climate resilient infrastructure. This is why we've designed this event to be inclusive. We've brought together thought leaders from a whole range of organizations, the private sector, U.S. government, the development community more broadly, to talk about the challenges and opportunities for how we can scale up climate resilience. So we have a fantastic lineup today. We have a lot to go through, and we have a short amount of time. We will start off with a moderated panel discussion with representatives from FEMA, from USAID, and Marsh. We have with us today Samantha Medlock, who is the Assistant Administrator for Resilient Strategy at FEMA. We have Chris Sari with us. Chris is the Acting Chief Climate Officer with the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. And we have Amy Barnes, who is the Head Climate and Sustainability Strategy at Marsh. Then we'll pivot and we'll do what we call an implementation lab. We'll have a number of participants who will come up and give a series of flash talks on emerging best practices. We're straying a little bit from the typical panel approach, but we think this will keep things a little more interesting. It'll allow for a broader discussion and hear from a lot of different perspectives and ideas, and really help us bring together some additional ideas, look at best-in-class approaches, try to find some synergies that will help us catalyze additional action and investment. So with that, let me pause and invite our panelists to please take the stage. Okay, well, welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Let's dive right in. Let's start off with some questions and conversations about infrastructure. And maybe we'll put this to just a question to all three of you, maybe starting with Sam, then Chris, and followed by Amy. We're talking about infrastructure resilience. Obviously, infrastructure is foundational for countries to meet their sustainable development goals and climate goals. From your perspective, what do you think some of the key challenges and really opportunities that the global development community faces in meeting the worldwide infrastructure needs?
Sure. Thank you very much. And I'm honored to kick off this incredible panel. Thank you so much for y'all's incredible organizing and bringing this together. And really looking forward to that interactive approach. So let's dive right in. You know, I think we all are aware of the challenges that are faced around the world. Folks are probably most familiar with my agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, through our disaster response and recovery mission. But we are also actively engaging in advance of disasters and investing technical and financial assistance to help local leaders prepare for the impacts of the climate crisis that we know can no longer be avoided. But there are additional challenges beyond funding. There's also a real need to connect local leaders to technical assistance, the kind of skilled and sustained technical assistance that can unlock funding and capital when they need it most. Another challenge that I think is starting to get some really good discussion this year here at this COP is the artificial separation between the pathways toward greenhouse gas emissions reductions and the pathways toward adaptation, resilience, and preparedness. So at FEMA, we have committed to taking an integrated approach led by this current administration. For example, we are deploying capital through the bipartisan infrastructure law, through the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as other disaster recovery programs. Just last year, FEMA deployed $3 billion to our communities through a pre-disaster mitigation grant program called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. But what we've also done is advanced a low carbon materials and net zero policy so that those local leaders that want to build back better, build back stronger for greater resilience, taking into account what disasters are teaching us through stronger building codes and standards, but they can also bring clean energy along for the ride, right? And integrate renewables, integrate storage and microgrids into their disaster recovery projects. There's a lot more to say about that, but I want to move through our panel quickly. But the challenges are great, but the opportunities are greater. And with partnerships like these, I think we're real prepared to meet the moment.
Thanks, Sam. And I want to just thank the mayor, first of all, because cities are great innovators, and we learn so much from them. That's both whether we're talking internationally or in the U.S. So the fact that you were meeting with people in the Amazon and recognizing those similarities is so incredibly important. So I want to thank you for being here, but also for the innovations that I know cities bring. I think one of our biggest challenges right now with infrastructure is it's very piecemeal, so as you were mentioning. And one of the things we often think about is we have gray infrastructure and we have green infrastructure, and we don't think about the fact that we need to bring these two together. And by bringing those two together, we can build greater climate resiliency and also have many different benefits. So imagine a park that is great urban space that can retain water that is coming down, and then draw that water away from housing and building and prevent flooding. Now, luckily, we don't have to imagine it. These parks are now existing in what's being known as spongy cities. I love the name of that. And one in Thailand called Chulalongkorn Sanitary Park, and I apologize if I just happened to not say that name correctly, was designed with climate extremes in mind. And the park can hold up to actually 1 million gallons of water during extreme precipitation events. And it then directs the runoff away to sloped rain gardens where it can then actually be cleansed. So this is an incredible thought about how we do adaptation and resiliency in the system. And I like to think about that as preventative medicine. So if we can do this up front, then we can avoid disaster on the back end. And I know one of the things that cities often have to think about is, but isn't this more costly? Why would we do this? How do we think about this? And I love that. Thank you, Veronica, for shaking your head. Because what we've basically learned is that for $1 invested in climate resiliency, you can save anywhere from $10 to $13 in different forms of aid. And so that's some of the messages that I also think we need to carry forward, as well as this is really good to start on the front end to help us build greater resiliency.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me here. And to build on that, I mean, I think first of all, as far as infrastructure goes, we need it to be built more quickly, we need it to be fair, and we need it to be sustainable. And I think they've often been seen as trade-offs, and we can't afford for them to be trade-offs. But where does insurance sit within that? And I was really pleased to hear the first speaker refer to insurance, because I think one of the things that our industry is very, very good at is pricing risk. And the price of risk is a really important signal to help people understand where to make investments. So involving the insurance community early can help understanding that cost of risk and exactly where the resilience measures and those investments will have the largest payoffs. But building on the points you're making, Chris, about grey and green infrastructure, I think as we look to incorporate more green infrastructure into our cities, we need to come up with a way to price externalities. And I know that's a challenge economists everywhere have been working on for a really long time, but the Mayor talked about the Ducks Unlimited partnership. We can see the restoration of more wetlands being crucial to protecting homes and businesses. But we need to have a business model where the person incurring the costs of that resilience measure can be paid by the people benefiting from it. And I do hope that we'll be able to innovate within the insurance community, so the insurance community can be part of the story that prices externalities, that allows for more grey-green infrastructure to be built.
Well, thank you all. Let's shift a little bit and talk about working at scale, scaling up. And we often talk about a whole of government approach. And one of the things I think is fantastic about this particular discussion, we usually think of, or I usually think of in the U.S. government, broader U.S. government working at scale, whole of government. But I think a point to underscore here is it's going right down to the mayors, it's going down to the local communities, the local governments, and the U.S. government and broadly. How do we all work together to really hit on and address this massive financing gap? How can we do a better job working at this whole of government type scale to really scale it up? What challenges do you see? What type of opportunities do you see in terms of working at scale? And if I can put this maybe to Sam first and then to Chris.
Sure, happy to. I think we've all recognized these barriers to access to resources, and I'm very pleased that the Community Disaster Resilience Zones Act, a bipartisan bill, passed and was signed into law by the President in 2022 to work to respond to this and help identify in a place-based way specific locations that are at greatest risk and have greatest need to overcome those barriers. So by using these polygons on a map, specific zones that have been drawn on a map, we're able to help local leaders access the kind of technical and financial assistance in a blended finance approach or connecting to technical assistance. So we've seen, for example, more than 500 of these community disaster resilience zones, or CEDARs, get identified. And what we do see is not only is the U.S. federal government organizing to prioritize the deployment of technical and financial assistance, but the private sector as well, including through philanthropy, through insurance and reinsurance, and working to bridge these gaps. Most recently, we're really excited to announce that we've made those first designations of community disaster resilience zones for tribal communities and for territories. And with our tribes, we took a co-designation approach to where we work directly with communities where there's not a lot of data available, but to identify areas that they prioritize as being at greatest risk and greatest need. And what we've seen through that effort is not only has the U.S. federal government mobilized, for example, with the Department of Housing and Urban Development and their Green and Resilience Retrofits program, they are prioritizing the deployment of finance and technical assistance toward strengthening public and multifamily housing, not only to prepare and have greater resilience using stronger codes and standards, but also to include emissions reductions for the built environment. But we've also seen great leadership happening across philanthropy, where they are putting skilled and sustained technical assistance directly in communities to help take more of a systems approach and help connect needs with resources.
Excellent. Chris?
Great, thank you. I'm just going to agree with what Sam said in terms of we really do need to take a whole of government approach. And it really does maximize the benefits. And I'd say on the international side, we've really seen that with a couple of our key programs, Feed the Future, and then also the President's emergency plan for adaptation and resilience, where when we can come together, we can really make a difference for communities. We all love our acronyms in the federal government, and I can only imagine how hard it is when you're in a developing country, not only trying to figure out the acronyms we use, but also try to bring everyone together. So I just want to highlight one example of really showing how effective this is. So in Malawi, working through Power Africa, USAID was able to bring together the interagencies to create the first utility-scale solar plus power project. And what happened was MCC, thank you very much, our great partner, made some very early investments that laid the groundwork. USAID was then able to come in to provide advisory services. And then finally, the DFC was able to come in with the $25 million loan to help develop the project. And by layering all of these different projects together, we were able to create this really amazing project. And so when we can really harness that, where we can work together and help local communities out or local countries out, we can really make a huge difference.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, let's dig a little bit more into working with the private sector, and I think we heard Advisor Zaidi mention this as well. Private sector, not just as a source of financing, but a source of expertise, a source of data. And maybe a question for you, Amy. You know, we've talked about how the public sector can finance large-scale infrastructure, but from the private sector standpoint, what are some of the key climate-related risks and challenges that Marsh sees with its private sector clients? You know, how are you working to address these?
So I'm going to pivot that question slightly away from the private sectors as owners of infrastructure. And we know in the US that the private sector owns, I think, is about 85% of the infrastructure. But as the private sector of clients of infrastructure, as the people that depend on the water utilities, the energy utilities, all of those very thermally fragile infrastructure assets that we have, whether it's transportation. Because the challenge that they have is mapping those infrastructure dependencies. Even for your own assets, it's not always clear where your power's coming from, where your water comes from, the transportation infrastructure that you rely on, let alone as you push that through that supply chain. Now, anyone who ever hears me speak will hear me refer to Taiwan, where the government has been paying rice farmers not to plant rice for 3 years so there's enough water to make semiconductors. And for the private sector to track those dependencies on that water as a utility that far down their supply chain is really, really challenging. So first of all, they need to understand where those dependencies are so that they can build their resilience. And some of those things are insurable. Some of those sort of ecosystems are definitely insurable. But another area of vulnerability that we haven't really talked about, we've been talking about infrastructure as assets, but the mayor absolutely centered on the people aspects. And in companies, the private sector is increasingly worried about people. And some of my clients in California are worried about being able to recruit, because if people can't insure their house, don't have the services they need, then they're worried about actually being able to employ people because of the consequences. I can see you want me to wrap up.
No, I was agreeing with you strongly. I will say I'm going to have to let you guys off the hook. I had another question I wanted to put to all three of you, but I do want to make sure we maintain enough time for our implementation lab portion. So thank you all. Really appreciate this conversation and your insights. Let me pivot a little bit here. You guys can stay on the stage. We won't let you off entirely. All right. So again, thank you. If we can pivot at this time and move to our implementation lab portion, I'd like to invite our international experts and thought leaders to provide their perspectives on the biggest opportunities, the challenges, and other emerging best practices to really scaling up climate resilient infrastructure. So I will introduce each of them now. Wait until I call you up to come up. But I'd like you to take the podium one at a time in the order that I present you, and you can give your flash talk, and then return to your seat, and the next person will come up. So we'll kick things off with Niels Holm Nielsen, head of the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery at the World Bank. Then we'll hear from Veronica Scotti, the Group Managing Director and Chairperson of Swiss Re Public Sector Solutions. Then we'll hear from Inkeril Engtusen, Inkrul is the CEO of the Millennium Challenge account in Mongolia. She leads the implementation of MCC's compact in Mongolia. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with Jesper Hornberg, the CEO of Global Resilience Partnership. So, Niels, you're welcome to come up.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. The World Bank finances about 30 billion, 25, 30 billion a year for climate. About half of that climate adaptation. We operate as a large development financier, so it's not going to surprise maybe much that I will argue that anything climate adaptation, if you are financing in the global south or in the poorer countries of the world, has to be integrated with development. Otherwise, it simply doesn't make sense. In some ways, you can argue you need to have infrastructure before you can adapt your infrastructure. And that's exactly the kind of line of work we are in. Many of the challenges you just heard from the panel, they certainly exist in our daily work. We try to address this at as many scales as we can. We bring the best analytics we can in at a macro level for the planning cycle with a country around how they want to allocate our scarce financing for them. But we bring much more specific information directly into the investment equation, project by project, city by city. And that is often much more challenging. We, just like you were mentioning, the need of bringing technical assistance directly down to the local community or directly to the mayor, we need to do that as well across any area really on adaptation. We sometimes succeed. There's the largest urban green park in Africa is in Beta, which we have financed together with a few other development partners, the kind of examples you were giving. They exist all over Africa. We currently have a $260 million project under implementation in Tanzania that largely is going to create a large urban green park that functions to help manage the water that otherwise is flooding the city 7 times a year. But the knowledge equation here, and when you're thinking about how to scale globally, the scaling happens through the financing, but the financing only flows for projects that can be financed, and that requires knowledge. So it's certainly not only about the money. The knowledge equation is very, very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John, for the opportunity. And let me actually build on the spirit of inclusion that we've heard. We've had the pleasure personally and as an institution to work alongside FEMA, USAID, Marsh, and many constellation, and I'm sure that we can do more together also to serve the people, Mayor Logan. I love what Mrs. Zaidi said. Look at insurance as a platform, and it's apparently the missing link. So let me try and close a little bit that gap. As an insurance industry, if you don't know how to think of us in the context of infrastructure, you could think of us in 3 ways. We are very large investors. We're very able and keen to help de-risk infrastructures, and we're here to help you with risk data and insight, the knowledge piece that can make a difference between putting money into a project or not and defining what a good project looks like. As an investor, you should know we have a very keen interest in investing in infrastructures around the world. And they're not just good financial return. For most of us, this is intertwined with social and environmental positive impact. Within our own portfolio, Swiss Re, we just invested 1.2 billion in environmental and social specific infrastructure for communities that are at disadvantage, half of which was in fact in the US. So I think there is a tremendous potential to do more, considering that just a couple of years ago we did not have this level of investments. So let's find this pipeline of opportunities. As a de-risker, we can be quite transformational actually, because we can help protect projects, reduce risk, and attract other investors that maybe have even deeper pockets than ours. And over the last few years, we've really worked alongside multilateral development banks, development financial institutions, the International Renewable Energy Agency, to help mobilize capital towards the global south, where we do know that risk perception is one of the biggest issues in capital being deployed at attractive terms. Just last year, we helped cover 15,000 renewable energy projects. I think we could double that again if we can work towards more alignment and more transparency around the risk and the returns. Which brings me to my very last point. How can we help close this understanding of what a good infrastructure investment look like? We have been able to assess these projects for a very long time, but up until recently, this was just information that we held for ourselves. And it's in more recent years that we've made that information available publicly. I'm very proud of this work. As an institution, we've taken it. We're not the only ones, because it's the critical gap to actually getting money to flow where it needs to go. And through our digital analysis that allow you, all of us, to see how the risk could look like 50 years from now, what building in a certain way or not would do. We have the ability today to model all of it. I'll give you an example specifically around flood. Flood affects 58% of all cities around the world. Whether it's coastal or fluvial, is actually very much manageable. With the right interventions, we can reduce the losses from 98% of coastal flooding and 75% of fluvial flooding. So this is an insight that we have in assets that we want to invest into alongside the administration to make sure that populations can be protected, economies can be protected, and actually we're looking at prosperity. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I just want to share about what we're doing under the Mongolia Water Compact under our partnership with MCC. So Mongolia's capital, Ulaanbaatar, is under significant strain, both by the impacts of climate change and looming water scarcity. Climate change drives mass exodus from rural to urban areas, and now over half of Mongolia's population, or over 1.6 million people, reside in a city which was designed for less than one-third of it. Moreover, it was identified that by mid-2020s, which is about now, Ulaanbaatar will face an imminent water supply shortage unless a decisive and extensive action is taken. So the Mongolia Water Compact, jointly implemented by the U.S. and Mongolian governments, aims to preemptively address this risk by constructing critical water infrastructure that will increase Ulaanbaatar's bulk water supply by 80%. So what exactly are we doing? First, we're building new well fields that will almost double the water available for Ulaanbaatar's residential and commercial use with the first advanced water purification plant in Mongolia. The state-of-the-art facility will help solve the issue of industrial pollution, which prevented the proper utilization of this important resource to create economic value and to improve the quality of life for our people. Second, also for the first time in Mongolia, we're implementing a large-scale water recycling practice in energy production. So the wastewater recycling plant we're building under the compact will reuse the treated wastewater released into nature, and will replace up to 85% of fresh water used in power and heat generation in Ulaanbaatar. So to put it in simpler terms, we will be able to save up to 36 billion bottles of fresh water, or 3 hours of Niagara Falls flows each year. And our compact is unique in that we are not only limited to construction of hard assets. Our sustainability component aims to ensure that our water systems are placed for long-term sustainability in terms of finance, environmental, and also social resilience. So in short, we're building capacity of our water utilities to properly operate and maintain these new assets. Second, we're introducing sound financial framework to enable cost recovery through tariffs, but while also protecting the vulnerable. And third, we're undertaking regulatory and policy actions that will lay the foundation for improved water governance for years to come. So in short, by considering all different types of sustainability, the Mongolia Water Compact represents a true-life example of a holistic and climate-resilient infrastructure investment. Thank you.
And they put me last. That's nice. First of all, I'm from the Global Resilience Partnership. We work with innovation, policy, and knowledge, surfacing new innovation that can on resilience that can be scaled up. We back it up with science, and we convene things at the Resilience Hub and similar places. So that's just background what we do. I should also just say thank you to the U.S. for its leadership in this. I think that's absolutely amazing. And thanks to everyone who's here working really hard. The only ones that are working harder are the implementers. It's 10 times harder to implement stuff in our space. So, Mayor, thank you so much. Resilience to us is not coping, and it's not recovering either. It is transforming. So what I'm going to give you now, not so many examples of what we do, but just our approach to how we look at how do you build resilience that can scale. Systems thinking is needed. We've heard that mentioned. You need the holistic picture. It's very complex, so you need to map. And you also need to learn. You need to continuously be agile in what you do and adjust what you do and move pieces, make sure you have the right players in the room, make sure you're inclusive in the room, and I think the mayor gave really good examples of why that is important. You need to work through partnerships, and partnerships means collaboration, and then it means something that I've heard alluded to by the mayor only, which is you need to listen. So you need to listen to everyone that is involved in what you do, because it's the farmer, it's the people that you have to serve. They know what the problem is much, much better than what you do. And if you want something that's scalable, you need to have that in your thinking. You need to build capacity. I'm sorry, I was going to use the mayor as an example again, but you need capacity to actually build the things, because you need absorption capacity too. Where do you put the money? I've lived in Kenya most of my adult life. I'm Swedish, hence my funny accent. If you want to invest in farmers in Kenya, you need to make sure that the absorption capacity is there. And it's not just the farmer. You need to do it gradually, and you need to also invest in the system. You need to invest in the entire infrastructure around it, the financial infrastructure, the seed infrastructure, and so on. Learn from failure. It's not bad to fail. I think it's good to fail because it gives you data, and that data is something you can build on. You need to reflect. So listen, reflect, things that we rarely do actually, because we just rush forward. We need to hurry, don't get me wrong, but we need to listen and we need to reflect. What happened? What can we learn from that? And you need to leave your comfort zone. You need to invite people that you don't normally work with. You need to invite private sector, but not just the funders, the actual industry players, the guys you normally wouldn't spend time with. If this sounds complex, grab someone who works in resilience and scaling resilience and learn more. We're here, obviously. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Jesper. And this is the time when I'm supposed to come up and wrap everything up and summarize. I'll start off with this is complex. I'm not going to try to summarize in 30 seconds. But I will say, there's a lot to digest. And we talked about how do we scale it up. It's not just the financing. It's about working together from the national down to the local, up to the international and global. It's not just the money. It's bringing together the knowledge, the data, the information, the private sector, not just the governments. It's bringing all of this together in a way that gets us where we need to be. And it's complicated, as you said. So I'll just wrap it up by saying, again, a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Mayor Logan. Thank you to Advisor Zaidi. And maybe just a big round of applause for everybody for joining today. I know it was a lot to cover. And just as one final thing, we do want to do a group photo. So if we can invite the mayor, our implementation lab participants, everybody to come up. And thank you again.
Thank everyone for coming to the U.S. Center. Make sure you leave your headsets or headphones on the chairs. All the speakers to the stage will take a group photo. Our next event here is at 3:30, Mobilizing Climate Finance at Scale, Perspectives from Private Finance and Development Finance Institutions. That is being led by our U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC.
We loved having you join us at the U.S. Center. Please remember to return your headsets as you leave. Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon. If you are curious about the full U.S. Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk. Welcome to the U.S. Center. If you are hearing this, congratulations, your headset is working properly. To adjust the sound on your headsets, use the volume rocker on the side near the power button. If you are curious about the full U.S. Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk.
Hello and welcome to the U.S. Center and our event, Mobilizing Climate Finance at Scale, Perspectives from Private Finance and Development Finance Institutions. It's our honor to welcome to the stage Anna Spitzberg, the Chief Climate Officer of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're all still energized. I'm very energized, and I'm very excited to be here and to have this conversation with Michael and Dana and Aparna on mobilizing climate finance at scale and partnering effectively to do so. This is a very momentous time for DFC because we're just marking our 5th year anniversary. And I think as we look back, we realize there's a significant amount to be proud of and that it's actually possible to make a lot of headway in a short amount of time, which gives me optimism that we can innovate and scale and deploy climate finance in a way that we actually need to face the challenges that are ahead. And I want to take a little moment just to share why I have this lens through DFC. And it is because if we look at FY fiscal year 2021, we had less than $500 million in commitments to climate finance, to mitigation and adaptation. And if we look at what we have in fiscal year 2024, we're nearly $4 billion. That is a portfolio growth of 7 times. It's quite incredible. And we also this year just had our first year with the highest ever commitment to adaptation financing, with over $1.3 billion. And so it really shows that there's an opportunity for the private sector to support food and water security. There's a private sector opportunity to support resilient communities. And we're there to really stimulate and help meet that demand as much as possible. But the thing I really want to highlight is that a lot of these transactions that we do, they don't just reduce emissions. They are economic growth multipliers. They have incredible benefits. They provide affordable energy security and access. They provide resilient infrastructure and natural capital. They provide resilient supply chains for energy transition that actually also have multi-uses. And they support job growth and productivity increases with micro, small, and medium-sized companies, 40% of which have significant trouble getting access to credit. So the amount of benefits that come out of these transactions are truly incredible, and we see that in the deals that we've seen go through. We see that in the $126 million loan commitment that we made to Cahaya Medco Geothermal in East Java, Indonesia, where there will be baseload clean energy that will also reduce the reliance on imported fuel that has incredible price volatility. We see that in technical assistance support that we're providing for a feasibility study to Pensana Metals for a rare earth refinancing facility, for a rare earth refining that will be done in Angola. And that provides not just supply chain resilience, but it builds value add in the country. We also see that with a $4 million equity investment in Regenera Ventures for rural Mexico, regenerative agricultural practices. So this is something, there are many more of these deals, but everywhere we look, the benefits that we see, it's not just one level of benefit, there are about 5. And that is really incredible to remember. But we have many more examples. We need exponentially more examples to get to the impact that we want to see, because of course, as we look at the estimates on climate change, we expect to see 100 million face extreme poverty as a result of it and incredible displacement. So we need to find a way to address these challenges, but we also need to maximize on the opportunity because there's trillions of dollars behind the table that are sitting there. And again, there's an incredible amount of private sector demand to address these challenges. And for us, we see that there are a few pathways to do so. One, we need to scale the amount of capital deployed and make sure that it's geographically dispersed. For anyone that has seen the numbers, that is not what we have today. The number of investment that is going across mitigation and adaptation is more concentrated than we would like to see. And that is the reason that we think it's important to really crowd in institutional capital in emerging markets, and it's why we committed $50 million to Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners that will be investing in very large-scale energy projects in emerging markets, and they will be bringing institutional capital, they will be bringing along LPs, they will be bringing along their experience. We also realize that we need to mobilize the entire economy. We need small players to be there. And we realize it's not easy for small players to go through DFI processes. It's not easy when you're a small ticket size, which means projects in energy efficiency and agricultural adaptation and e-mobility might be constrained. And that's why we have partnerships with banks such as Standard Bank to be able to access some of these players. And at the same time, it is really important that we increase the amount of money going to adaptation and that we build a commercial model to do so. And it's why we have $15 million commitment into PULA to reach smallholder farmers that typically would not be able to get crop insurance. It's because in adaptation, we constantly see allocation and price risk, and we need to be able to find ways and interesting models to address this. And so let me just end by saying when I look at what we've seen out there in new business models, when we've seen out in the new type of projects that are coming out, and all of the people that are scratching their heads every single day to try and come up with a way to solve these challenges, that's where we see optimism. It's where I see optimism. And I want to hand it over to Aparna to talk with some of the people that we have been holding hands with to make a lot of this happen. But thank you again for being here. Thank you again for your energy and your support to this cause.
Please, if you want to join us on stage. Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much to the team for pulling together such a fantastic convening. We're really, really quite excited to be here as DFC. I'll just take a moment to introduce our panelists, and I'll say at the top, one of our panelists could not make it due to some travel constraints and unforeseen challenges. So we'll do our best to kind of highlight their work and ensure that we're kind of talking through the work of the entire ecosystem. So I'm joined here by Dana Barsky, who's the Global Head of Sustainability Strategy and Net Zero for Standard Chartered Bank. She has over 20 years of corporate finance and sustainability experience. Prior to Standard Chartered, she was the Global Head of Sustainable Finance at Credit Suisse, among several other notable roles with GFANZ, the World Bank, and she's also been a friend to the DFC for some time. Next is Michael Hannibal. He's a lead partner for offshore wind at Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, CIP, and he has over 25 years of experience in power generation, transmission, and distribution. He started his career at ABB and served as the CEO of Siemens Offshore Wind for 7 years. And he was a key player in getting the world's first floating offshore wind turbine established back in 2009. So as you can imagine, a huge wealth of experience across the climate finance ecosystem here on stage. I can introduce myself briefly as well. So I'm Aparna Srivastav. I'm the Deputy Chief Climate Officer at DFC. Have been there for several years, really kind of looking at how we can integrate climate across as much as possible when it comes to DFC's investments in energy and infrastructure, and kind of just really recognizing the full range of co-benefits when it comes to climate investments and ultimately private capital mobilization. So in this discussion, as you heard from Anna, one of the biggest areas that we're really focused on as DFC is private capital mobilization. Because ultimately we have to face the fact that no individual public balance sheet, or even all the public balance sheets combined globally, none of those budgets are going to be enough to address the financing gaps ahead of us presented by climate change. And so we need to ensure that we are really focused on bringing in private sector capital, because that is ultimately where the financing is and needs to be driven from. And so as we thought about kind of the structure of this panel and who we wanted to kind of have in this conversation, we were really excited to be having a financial institution, a fund manager, and a borrower. And so that was going to be the organization PULA, who's been doing really innovative work in smallholder insurance access, which is a huge, huge area of need to really build resilience of folks across emerging markets. But ultimately, when we're thinking about private capital mobilization, DFIs really play quite a critical role. And I think DFC has some really great examples from the wide range of financial products that we can bring to the table, whether it's our political risk insurance, guarantees, debt, equity. It kind of pretty much the wide range. And really looking forward to dive into this a little bit more on this panel. And so just to kind of say at the top, I have a few questions that I'm excited to get through with our panelists, but we, time permitting, are excited to open it up to some audience questions as well. So to kick us off, can you both kind of share a little bit more about how you have developed a relationship with DFC and what you've learned about working with DFIs, working with us, and maybe things that you may not have known before for others to be aware of. And ultimately, it'd be helpful to hear more about your role in private capital mobilization. So, Michael, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, happy to do so. Maybe first to you who do not know Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, who we are. In very short, we are basically bridging institutional capital into greenfield renewable projects. So we bring institutional capital to a huge pipeline of projects that we have created. We have approximately 30 billion euros under fund management today, have set a pretty high target for where we should be in 2030. We have built a pipeline of projects of more than 160 gigawatts. So we have capital, we have projects, so now we basically need to get them realized. And for realizing them, we are really, really happy that we met you, because that's a big part of it. We have basically deployed what we call our Growth Market Fund 1, which is basically looking at high growth, middle income countries. There with the first fund we had $1 billion, and then now we have basically on the way Fund 2, which will be $3 billion. It is important to have partners like you on board who understand the importance of investing in those areas and who understand basically what it means to also build bridges between private and public. And I can come back to why this is so important. But it was and has been a pleasure working with you, with your people, the energy that you're working with and the passion for making a difference. So that's in short what we have experienced.
So I go way back with DFC. As you said, I've been around a long time, making me feel old. But I've dealt with the DFC in a number of different products, but also a number of thematics, which I think is actually really important here. I know we're here to talk about climate, but early on, I worked with DFC to develop the first impact principles, and DFC really took a leadership on that. Subsequent to that, I worked with them on what's called the 2X program, which was really trying to empower women. And again, I think DFC really took leadership there. With respect to climate as well, and I'll talk about some of the transactions that I've worked with DFC on, really also took very early leadership in providing political risk guarantees with respect to nature, and I'll talk about that. And I'm just really thrilled to hear how far you've come on adaptation. It's just such a critical topic that we have to talk about more and more to ensure that more capital is being crowded in for adaptation and mitigation. And so just hearing about your work there. So I've worked with DFC over the years, as I've said, and it's been across products. So with respect to, I've seen DFC take make catalytic investments in private equity funds, climate related, probably before climate funds were in vogue, and I think that principal investment that you made, the initial investments, were truly catalytic because it gave other investors the confidence to invest behind DFC, knowing that your diligence is so robust. So I've also worked with DFC on the Belize Debt for Nature swap, where you offered a $610 million political risk insurance, which really unlocked protection of the oceans, 30% of the oceans around Belize. Also, I would say very catalytic. One of the early DFIs to offer such a guarantee. And that's really unlocked the debt for sustainability swap market, which has gotten more and more momentum, and I really, frankly, thank DFC for that. I've just to talk a little bit about my role, because I think it's very much tied to the way that DFC has been thinking. I run the sustainability strategy for Standard Chartered, and I run our net zero program, but I also have the privilege to run what we call the innovation hubs, which are thematic hubs which allow me the opportunity to almost experiment a little bit and look for innovators in these thematics. One is adaptation. The second is blended finance. The third is carbon. The fourth is nature finance, and then social. And I think you guys are really leaders across all of those thematics, so thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that. I think it's exciting to hear these top lines and excited to kind of double click on them. So, Michael, maybe back to you. I think DFC has been especially excited about our support for you guys, and especially, I think, the example that it sets for just how catalytic the use of our equity tool can really be, and in how much that can really unlock. If there's more you can share about that investment, would love to hear a little bit more for those that are maybe not as familiar. But kind of given that backdrop, given all of the experience that you bring to the table, how would you describe the changes you've seen in emerging markets since you've started, not just with CIP, but I think kind of your career more broadly? And kind of been building on that, what is the next generation of energy or green transition investments that you guys are looking for in order to really respond? And sorry, this question keeps continuing, but how can donors and DFIs help accelerate investments in those areas that you're identifying?
Yeah, if we start with the first, we are super delighted with what we have achieved in our Growth Market Fund 1, Growth Market Fund 2. The impact you can do in those, you can say, high growth, middle income countries is basically 3-4 times larger than what you do with a climate investment in a typical OECD market. We will, of course, continue doing that because that's also needed. Everything contributes. But having investors who are prepared to go in to the growth markets with the middle income, that's really, really important, because that's where you can make a really true difference. And then you could say, couldn't you take that one step further? And that's where public finance comes in, because if you are to go basically accelerate more, then there needs to be some funding coming in supporting the high growth markets with grid infrastructure, so that you actually can do the renewable energy projects and you can actually transmit the electrons. And if you go outside to less mature markets, then you need some public finance to come in and basically take part of de-risking the early phases of the projects, so that you, exactly as you rightfully mentioned, can continue attracting institutional capital, which will be needed in those regions as well. So you can say it's basically a start where we have now, with the Growth Market Fund 1, proven that you can do reasonable risk-balanced returns in those markets, and we will continue that in the Growth Market Fund 2. And then I think it's interesting to look ahead, basically, as you say, and what could then be the next role. The next role could actually be that you continue the partnership and develop that into grid in the more mature and early engagement, equity de-risking of projects in less developed markets.
Great. And I guess where would you see donors and DFIs kind of helping catalyze some of that when it comes to grid investments?
It will very much on the less developed markets be around, of course, taking part of the projects in the early phases where you can actually de-risk them by investing into de-risking. But it's also on the regulatory side, so that you can actually, because fundamentally it's a relatively simple equation of you stack up all your costs, the capex, the devex, the finance costs, and all these levers, and then you really need to have a power purchase agreement on the other side that can basically justify that you bring in institutional capital. the element of the finance cost is a function of maturity of the project and how much you can de-risk it. So the price tag for the electricity and what you need of a PPA is a function of how you de-risk, which is a function of how good can you do the early work, and the early work is where you need, in the less mature market, some public finance or support to get that flying if we want to make a huge impact in these markets.
And maybe I'll just pick up on that from the debt perspective. It's interesting because de-risking is so critical in the early stage of the infrastructure projects. One evolution in DFIs and MDBs that I would like to see is as the projects get to the more mature state, that they think about distributing their own debt to have more private sector participation to allow you then to come in again on the earlier stages. I think that will really accelerate the investing in renewables from an infrastructure perspective.
That's such an important point, and that's where I think kind of technical assistance, earlier stage support, whether from, kind of all around the USG ecosystem and beyond, can be really quite critical. So turning kind of formally to you, Dana, for DFC, partnerships with financial institutions make up a huge part of our portfolio. It's usually typically at least half of our commitments annually, just given that they are really a key way for us to ensure that our financing is reaching small and medium enterprises, kind of turning around and being able to actually disperse the amount of financing and credit facilities we're able to extend. And so I'm curious from your perspective, from an financing institution that's doing hugely developmental, innovative work across a pretty wide variety of sectors. What are the biggest opportunities and challenges you've identified when it comes to private capital mobilization?
So we operate in 53 countries around the world. So I would say it's pretty diverse. But look, in the developing world, we as a bank are really trying to extend as much credit to bring the developing world up. I mean, from a decarbonization perspective, I mean, we are hopeful that we can actually, in some of these developing markets, leapfrog the technologies to really help bring them along as quickly as possible. But the reality is, we are a bank. We are driven by risk and return, and so entities such as DFC that could help de-risk in different forms, be it through guarantees, first loss, mezzanine, even just some form of concessional capital, or even sometimes simply co-investing, then it really helps us kind of accelerate that transition. We all need to act as quickly as we can to get as much capital into the developing world as possible. And it's not possible unless we really drive forward the private-public sector partnerships.
Absolutely. And can you share, I guess, are there any examples specifically around private capital mobilization from Standard Chartered that would be kind of useful to highlight here for folks to learn?
Well, we have a lot. Well, I mean, there's so many here. I was speaking just yesterday on a project that we did in rooftop solar in India, for instance. Unfortunately, it wasn't with DFC. I have to think about the ones we've done with DFC. But in that example, it was initially it was a loan from IBRD, who gave a loan to the Bank of India, to your point, so maybe think about it on financial institutions. And they gave it to the Bank of India, which is a state-owned bank, because just that, which is they need to ensure rooftop solar going to SMEs, you really need very robust E&S processes, and you really need to ensure that the money is going to the right places and it's followed through, and there's proper controls and safety and water and everything's considered. And it's a hard lift, and that's why I think your strategy generally of giving to financial institutions for that money to go through to SMEs is so critical. Now, in this case, a little bit to my earlier point, the loan matured. I think fast forward 5-6 years later, that program was largely dispersed, and IBRD was actually coming up against their country limits of being able to lend more to India. And so as part of a solution here of recycling capital, Standard Chartered gave a loan to the Bank of India with a MEGA guarantee, and that funding went to actually repay the IBRD loan, and then that freed up IBRD, part of the World Bank Group, to lend more to India. And so it was this kind of recycling of capital, bringing the private sector in to recycle that public sector capital that I think was really impactful here.
If I should jump on that one, because it was interesting also what you said about basically de-risking. Because another way of de-risking is, of course, do a pipeline strategy with a number of repetitions. And that is actually what you can do here. Because if you basically find the way for public-private relationships, the debt side, the equity side, and you basically find the way to do this the right way, then the debt-equity ratio can be optimized. The risk premium can be decreased. The cost of capital in general will be, you can say, lowered. And then you start having something that can go into repetitions. And when you then see repetitions, then you also see speed, and then you actually see impact. And then you say speed, impact, and even more of it. So I think it's about getting started with a lot of the good things that you mentioned, and some capital that is willing to go in with a risk appetite to de-risk in the beginning, and then the vehicle will start running.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, and the credit rating of the DFC is so critical in helping drive down that cost of capital that you mentioned.
And it's exactly that, for that reason, that our political risk insurance is able to catalyze as much as it has been able to in the debt conversions. I'm curious if you could share, just kind of doubling back on, I think, your first intervention, the different innovation labs that you mentioned, looking at different themes. Can you share a little bit more on that, and kind of also in the context of private capital, just kind of what role that plays, how you're thinking about that?
I think I might even talk in the context of insurance, because I think that's just so critical to all of the almost all the thematics that I'm trying to accelerate. So, for instance, in our nature finance, I talked earlier about the strength of your guarantee to unlock debt for nature swaps that are driving capital into areas of protection, be it ocean, forests, that otherwise this capital wouldn't be flowing. That's one example. We also are looking, interestingly, we started to do some carbon finance projects where insurance is actually playing a really key role here as well. So we are investing in projects that generate carbon credits, and we have large cap corporate off-takers of that who are agreeing to buy the credits once they're delivered, but there's a gap, which is delivery risk. And so we've seen now insurance companies stepping in, and for the first time, which I think is really catalytic as well, to say, we will ensure that the project delivers, and then if so, then the client will buy the carbon credits. And I think that's a really interesting piece as well. With respect to adaptation, which was mentioned earlier, we're really trying to finance and progress business models along insurance that is really trying to be adaptive to floods and all sorts of, unfortunately, all sorts of disasters, so that when such thing happens, we're there to pay out. And I mean, we've done a lot of work on parametric insurance, for instance, tied to flooding. And so I think just the concept of de-risking is so important when it comes to adaptation, mitigation, and thinking about how to use it in new and creative ways.
Wonderful. No, and it's great to hear. I think there's two reactions that I have. I think on the insurance side of things, it's an area of huge interest for us at DFC as well, because I think that's a really interesting intersection. While insurance, cannot solve all of the needs presented by resilience needs, it does play a really critical role in terms of also being able to use private capital to build that economic resilience. And I think just to speak a little bit on Pula, the third kind of panelist that we were hoping to feature today was, DFC has provided $15 million in a commitment just this year to help them expand their offerings of insurance, specifically to actually half the time required for claims to be paid out. I'm personally a huge fan of parametric insurance products, so it's great to hear about that support from you all as well. But Michael, turning back to you, I guess, we, for better or for worse, when we think about climate finance, it often gets kind of categorized either as mitigation or as adaptation or, kind of some other category. And I'm curious, given your work on infrastructure development, how are you thinking about adaptation and resilience and kind of the role that kind of resilience measures can play in ensuring that your assets truly are, robust enough to withstand whatever is to come? I ask that in the context of kind of ensuring, financial responsibility. I think all financial institutions are kind of coming to the realization around kind of resilience measures.
No, it's definitely a super important area, and I think when you look at resilience and you look at adaptation and you look at all the levers, you need somehow to take the time to find out the different things, what to put in different baskets of risks, perceived risk, real risk, what will create resilience, what is perceived resilience, so that you basically analyze things so that you can have a either data-driven or a more fact-based discussion. Because resilience is, of course, super, super important in what we do and how we think in levers and do things. So that's super important.
That's great. Well, I think we actually do have a few minutes for questions. So I can pause there and see if we have any inquiring minds in the audience. I think there's one just here. Yeah.
All right. I want to touch base a little bit on the de-risking and the area of R&D funding as a big component of helping to de-risk some of this project. So typically, if you have, a huge infrastructure project, let's say waste management, recycling plant, and you go to DFC, for instance, it would want to see how much you've done already to prove either it's bankable and that you need initial capital to be able to execute, either as a feasibility study or you're doing a pilot. I would like to hear, what structures are in place to be able to support such R&D funding to ensure that at least as part of your portfolio of de-risking tools, if those could be available.
And maybe we can take one more question.
Thank you. Mine is to do with the risk distribution when it comes to emerging markets. We find that many a time when we need to distribute risk, especially for the non-global names, there are very few takers on the distribution. So do you have any list that you have in mind that can help us accelerate the distribution of our portfolios?
Debt distribution?
Sorry?
So what type distribution of debt or what?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Portfolio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it. Let's try to answer those two first. Did you want to start?
So I did not plant this gentleman, but I do know him. He's working on a very impactful project in Ghana, trying to convert diesel trucks to electric. He's literally taking the guts out of these refuse trucks and replacing them with, electrification, which frankly pays for itself over a period of, I don't remember, 10 years. I think what he's asking is, because he's spoken to us, frankly, when he's in the project development phase, so he's got 2 trucks out there now. I mean, frankly, the impact that will have to the country, both from a not just a financial perspective, but from a health perspective, from a noise perspective in the cities, what he's, I think, asking is, when he speaks to an organization like us, and we say it's a little early for us, how do we work to bring in a DFC to possibly de-risk a project like that in the earlier stages? That's why he's saying research and development. I think so. That's, I think, what his question was. Not a plant.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer that. I think DFC, we do have an authority around technical assistance to really help projects get to the stage of bankability. It is a newer authority for us to deploy, and we do have a decent track record, but we're looking to build on that, and we're eager to kind of be in touch with folks like you. I will say that, though, that DFC's technical assistance is very much kind of focused on like it requires cost sharing. There are some strings attached to it because we don't have grant making authority. That's where other USG partners and USG agencies, whether it's USAID, USTDA, and lots of others, can kind of come in to provide that sort of capital. Did you have?
Yeah, well, I could add a little bit into that. You can say it sounds for me it's a little bit some technical maturation and basically qualifying a solution. And as I hear it, then it's a thing with a lot of repetitions. So that's pretty good because you can say if you analyze a lot of projects over time, then you find those with a lot of repetitions. They often have to come out best at rank versus if it's a one-off thing. And here it sounds like a lot of repetitions. So what you can say, if we look at the wind industry with wind turbines, what you do there is basically breaking it down into components, and then you do components check. You do that with a highly accelerated life cycle test of the component. Then you put the component into a system. Then you do a highly accelerated life cycle test for a system, and then you put the system into a nacelle, and then you test that one for the lifetime over a short period. And then you actually have proven all the technical stuff. So that's the way to, you can say, piecemeal things and get the technical maturity moved up, which will then lower cost of capital again because it's kind of proven. And I could imagine you could do something as it's also a lot of repetitions, that you spend some time and effort in proving the first one and then come and ask when you have proven everything in that sense. So, and the second one, I simply couldn't hear that, but it sounded also to you.
Yeah, so I think look, we're a very strong originate to distribute bank, but to do that, right, it takes time to develop those relationships. I think if I understood it right, my one piece of advice would be, as more and more frameworks are developed, especially on transition finance, for instance, to find those funds that are aligned with the asset that's aligned with a framework. So you find the framework, apply it to a framework, and find those asset managers that are willing to hold that type of security. You know, it's not always easy, but I actually, on a positive note, I have to say, I have seen just more and more climate-focused funds form that are buying some more these types, these types of assets. More and more transition focused funds, and so I'm hopeful that distribution will become more and more easy as we all try to as more and more asset managers are effectively becoming more aware of the acute climate crisis.
Wonderful. Thanks. I think there was a question in the back and maybe here in the front.
Yeah, thank you for this very fascinating conversation. Talking about mobilizing investment in carbon markets in the global south, I wonder how you're thinking about or concerned about human rights aspects of that, particularly a phenomenon of green land grabbing, in which communities might be displaced from land that's then used for carbon credits, exacerbating existing vulnerabilities and human rights abuses, particularly in countries with, weak institutions.
I'll start with that. Yeah, no, look, it's unfortunately there have been projects that you have this this terrible issue. I mean, look, from our perspective as a bank, we're fortunately in a position to do extensive E&S diligence before we even consider a project like that. Can I say that happens all the time? No, and unfortunately as well, there's unforeseen circumstances. But look, I think as the world gets more and more, I'd say as countries get more and more accepting of carbon credits, and it becomes more and more mainstream, and you have more oversight, that hopefully we'll have fewer and fewer incidences like that.
Yeah, and I'll say from DFC's perspective, kind of with any investments that we're considering, we align entirely with the IFC performance standards, which do have kind of standards relating to kind of land grabbing and human rights issues. So it's absolutely a huge imperative for us to ensure kind of clear alignment there. But I think there was another question up here.
Thanks so much for such an interesting panel. I'm Tulika Narayan from Mathematica, focused on evidence generation. And this COP is focused on finance and the finance goal. And you gave very specific perspectives and ideas on specific investments. And there's this, we are across different panels. Sometimes we hear it's a problem of supply of finance, which is certainly what the COP is focused on. And the other times we talk about there is a paucity of projects. There is a shortage of pipeline. And I really want to get an honest answer from you guys, where you land, because you are investing. Are you really struggling to find projects? I'm beginning to sort of lean more on that side of struggling to find projects, and particularly if you look at adaptation. And if so, how important it is the role for evidence to really figure out what are the things which are going to work, where are the market failures, and so really just if you could just comment on that. Thank you.
Ooh. Well, you really right to the heart of it. Look, I hear all the time from MDBs generally there's not enough projects. And banks like us will say there's not enough guarantee capital, right? And so what we need to do is bridge that gap. I fundamentally do believe there are enough projects out there. Some are clearly immediately bankable. Some are marginally bankable, where we might need a DFC to come in. I think the best thing we can all do as a collective is try to strategically prioritize projects, particularly at a country level. I think that's thinking about countries holistically, I think, is really the key to solving this unlock. Because if you step back and you take any country, right, which projects are going to make the most impact? Which ones are financially viable on their own? Where do we need someone like a DFC to come in? And if you map it and work closely together, you can solve this. So I would say there's not a lack of projects, but we need to come together as fast as possible.
No, I can echo that. We have a fund series called Flagship Funds, where we are currently working on fund number 5, which is a 12 to 14 billion euro fund, and there we have a project pipeline of more than 25 billion. So you can say we have double the amount of project compared to the capital, and that's basically a general rule over the last many years. So seen from our side, it's unlocking the projects that seems to be the challenge. A lot of good pledges, a lot of good ambitions from politicians, have set high targets, and then it is actually working together to unlock things, and that's of course the capital. And depending on where you are in the market, it's often grid constraints. So having capital come in early enough to build out the grid, so that you actually, if you develop your project, can connect it. And then of course, if we go into less mature markets, less mature countries, then it is the increased collaboration between private and public funding and different institutions to get it work. But it's not the lack of projects. Then there could be the lack of components suddenly, but that's another equation. So.
Sorry, I would just to touch on something really important, especially for those government representatives here, the permitting process. To the extent that you can accelerate permitting process, it's really critical to developing the pipeline of projects, while keeping E&S considerations, always at the forefront of mind. But that, I've seen projects just be held up by just permitting, just take too long.
Great. So I think we're almost at time. I'll just quickly answer this final question, because I think it's an important one around whether there's kind of a greater need around supply or demand. And I think from our perspective, it really depends on whether we're thinking about mitigation or adaptation. I think clearly there has been enough demand. DFC is an entirely demand-driven organization. We support private sector companies that are looking for capital and are kind of very much responsive to those needs. And so I think clearly there has been enough demand for us to grow our portfolio the way that we have in the last few years. But if we're looking at being specifically proactive in a sector like resilience and adaptation, we have struggled to find pipeline in those areas. And so I think it really depends from one sector to the other. Great, looking forward to it. But thank you so much to our panelists for having us. Thank you so much to the U.S. Center for this wonderful event, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Our next and last event of the day is at 4:45. The Coalition for Climate Entrepreneurship Showcase and Networking event. That'll take place from 4:45 to 6 o'clock tonight. So please make sure you come on by. Leave your headphones. What's up?